2:47 a.m. -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and Marcus hadn't moved in 6 minutes. He knew because he'd been watching the second hand on his watch, the old analog one his father had given him, its face fogged slightly from the inside. He'd stopped checking the temperature gauge on the car dashboard 20 minutes ago. The number had stopped changing. That was worse, somehow, than watching it drop. The engine was dead. Not sputtering. Not struggling. Just, done. The kind of silence that settles into a vehicle when something fundamental has gone wrong and the machine has simply given up making noise about it. Nora was still talking. Low, steady, the words not quite reaching him through whatever was narrowing in his head. He blinked and turned toward her. Her red wool scarf was pulled up over her chin. She'd done that in the first 10 minutes after the engine quit, tucked it up, tucked it tight, like she already knew what kind of night this would be. Marcus. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. Stay with me. He nodded. He meant it. He just wasn't entirely sure he was telling the truth. They had left the ranger station at 11 p.m. That was the first mistake, leaving late. The second was trusting the weather app on a stretch of Montana highway that hadn't had a cell tower within 40 miles since sometime around 2019. The third was the radiator. He'd noticed the temperature gauge creeping up just past the junction with County Road 7, told himself it was nothing, told himself they were close enough. They weren't close enough. The car had coasted to a stop on the shoulder of a road that didn't feel like a road anymore. Snow had been falling since before they left and hadn't paused to reconsider. In the headlights, before the battery finally gave out, Marcus had watched the drifts building against the guardrail across from them, patient and indifferent, like they had nowhere else to be. He didn't think about that now. Thinking about that now wasn't useful. What was useful? The emergency bag in the back seat. A wool blanket, one, full size. 2 hand warmers, neither of them activated yet. A lighter. Half a bottle of water. Nora's extra gloves, which she'd shoved in the bag at the last minute when they were packing, and he'd made some quiet, stupid comment about overpacking. He hadn't said anything about that, and she hadn't brought it up. The cold in the car was not the same as the cold outside. That was the only thing keeping them in it. At -30, exposed skin reaches frostbite threshold in under 10 minutes. The car's metal shell was losing heat fast. A closed vehicle in still air insulates poorly once the engine warmth is gone, but it was still something. Still a barrier. Still a reason to stay. Marcus pulled the wool blanket over both of them, arranging it so Nora's shoulders were covered first. She didn't argue. She pressed closer to his right side and he felt the reality of her warmth against him, which was strange, that at -30, a person could feel warm. That body still did that. Still held on to something. He activated one of the hand warmers. Pressed it between them, low, at his hip. Saving the second one. For what, exactly, he didn't yet know. His fingers were the first thing he noticed. Not pain. That was the problem. The gray wool gloves were good gloves, and his hands were buried under the blanket, but somewhere around 3 a.m. the tips of his fingers on his right hand went from cold to something else. Quiet. Distant. He flexed them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the movement felt like moving someone else's fingers from across a room. He didn't tell Nora. He pressed his right hand flat against the hand warmer instead and told himself to be patient. That was the word he kept using inside his own head. Patient. Because the alternative to patient was panic, and panic at -30 in a stalled car on an empty Montana highway was not a thing he could afford. Nora shifted beside him. You're not talking. Thinking. About what? He looked at the fogged face of his watch. 3:09, about whether the hand warmer's doing anything. She reached under the blanket and found his right hand and held it between both of hers. He felt the pressure before he felt the warmth. He was grateful for the pressure. The watch had been his father's. He remembered watching the old man wind it every Sunday morning, the same small ritual, the same careful turns, like it mattered enormously that the thing stayed running. His father had never explained why he preferred it over a phone. Marcus hadn't asked. The kind of question you think you'll get around to asking. He looked at the watch now and wound it slightly, out of habit, out of something that wasn't quite superstition but wasn't quite not. 3:11. His fingers on his right hand were coming back. Pins and needles, which was actually the good sign, because pins and needles meant circulation. Numbness with no sensation at all was the thing to worry about. He worried about Nora's feet first. She was wearing good boots, insulated, rated to -25, but she'd mentioned, somewhere around mile 40, that her left sock had bunched up at the toe and she'd been meaning to fix it since they got in the car. She hadn't fixed it. A bunched sock compresses blood vessels. Compression at this temperature was a problem that moved faster than you'd expect. "Take your boot off," he said. She looked at him. "The left one. Do it under the blanket. Fix the sock and put it back on." She started to say something and stopped. Then she moved under the blanket, slow and careful to not let cold air in at the edges. He held the blanket tight to her shoulders while she worked. "How'd you know about the sock?" she asked, voice muffled. "You mentioned it. An hour ago." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. The blanket shifted. Then she said, "Okay. Better." He let the blanket drop back over her shoulders. He didn't tell her what he'd been thinking about while she was fixing it. 3:34 a.m. This was the hour that frightened him. Mild hypothermia typically sets in when core temperature drops from 98.6 toward 95 degrees. In a static, cold environment, no exertion, no additional heat source, insulated but not warm, a body can hold for a surprisingly long time. But around the 2-hour mark, the effort of holding starts costing more than the body has saved. Shivering, which is the body's active warming mechanism, consumes calories. And they hadn't eaten since 6 p.m. Marcus was shivering. He'd noticed it starting maybe 20 minutes ago, and he'd said nothing because shivering was still good, shivering meant his body was still fighting. But the energy it took was real and measurable and not infinite. He thought about getting out of the car. He sat with the idea carefully, the way you'd handle something sharp. The snow on the ground was 18 inches of packed base, with fresh powder on top. Snow, packed tight enough, has insulating value, it's roughly 90% air, and still air holds heat. If he could dig out even a shallow trench, pack walls around the car, slow the wind from pulling heat from the metal shell. The wind. That was the thing he hadn't been accounting for. He'd been so focused on temperature that he'd stopped registering the sound. But it was there, low and constant, pressing against the passenger side of the car, a pressure you felt in the frame. -31 was the air temperature. With wind factoring in, the effective felt temperature on exposed skin was closer to -55. The car was blocking some of that. If he went outside, it wouldn't be. He sat very still and thought through it twice. Then he turned to Nora. "I'm going to get out for a few minutes." The look on her face was not what he expected. She didn't panic. She didn't argue. She just said, "How long?" 5 minutes. "I want to check the snow depth around the car." She pulled the red scarf down from her chin. "I'll time you on the watch." He'd almost forgotten she could read it. He unbuckled it and handed it to her. Her pale fingers closed around the worn metal clasp. "If you're not back in 7, she said, I start yelling." 5, he said. 7, she said. 5 gives no margin. He didn't argue. The cold outside the car was a different category of thing. It was not a sensation. It was a condition, total, immediate, structural. He felt it press into the exposed strip of skin between his collar and his hat, felt it start working on his face within the first 30 seconds. He moved fast, keeping his chin tucked, breathing through his nose to warm the air before it hit his lungs. The snow around the passenger side was lower than he'd thought, maybe 8 inches against the undercarriage, piling against the door. Not enough to be structural insulation. He moved around the front of the car, bending low, and that's when he saw it. The drainage ditch. 6 feet off the shoulder, mostly filled with packed snow, running parallel to the road. Maybe 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide. Old snow on the bottom, firm enough to stand on. If they got down into it, used the car as a windbreak on one side and packed snow on the other. His face was wrong. That was the only way he could describe it. His cheeks had gone from painful to quiet, and quiet was the wrong direction. He turned back toward the car and moved. Nora had the watch in her hand when he opened the door and let the cold in with him. She didn't speak. She looked at his face and her expression did something careful and controlled. "We're moving," he said. "Where?" He told her about the ditch. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "The blanket won't stay dry." "It won't. But in the ditch we're out of the wind. Right now the wind is the bigger problem." She looked at the watch. She handed it back to him. They started moving. Getting Nora out of the car and across 6 feet of open ground took 90 seconds. It felt much longer. Marcus had the blanket over his shoulders, he'd folded over them both once they were settled, and the second-hand warmer in his jacket pocket, still unused. The cold hit Nora's face the moment she stepped out and she made a sound through her teeth, short and controlled, and then she was moving. The ditch was better. Not warm. That would be the wrong word. But the wind dropped by 2/3 the moment they were below grade, and that difference, that one change, was the most significant thing that had happened in the last 2 hours. Marcus felt it in his face. The quiet painful ache where his cheeks had gone numb started returning as sensation, which hurt, which was exactly what he wanted. He packed snow into the windward side of the ditch with his gloved hands, quick and methodical, building the wall up a foot higher than grade. Snow insulates. He'd known that as a fact for years. Feeling it work was something else. Nora helped. She didn't wait to be asked. They got the blanket around both of them, backs against the low side of the ditch, the car's frame 3 feet behind them, the snow wall in front. Marcus activated the second-hand warmer and pressed it against Nora's sternum, core first, always core first, and she wrapped both hands around it through the fabric. 4:02 a.m. He was still shivering. That was okay. She was shivering too. That was also okay. The shivering was the body doing its job. The body hadn't given up. That meant they hadn't given up. "Don't fall asleep," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that he might have missed it if the wind had been louder. But in the ditch, below the edge of the road, the sound had dropped to something almost manageable. "I know," he said. "I mean it." She shifted against him. Her shoulder pressed into his. "You got quieter in the last 20 minutes. He had. He'd noticed it happening and told himself it was concentration and almost believed it. The truth was slower than that. He'd felt the edges of his thinking soften somewhere around 3:45, had spent the last several minutes running the same practical sequence over and over in his head just to feel it stay sharp. Temperature. Wind. Blanket. Warmer. Ditch. Car. Time. Hypothermia's early cognitive effects aren't dramatic. It isn't confusion exactly. It's more like the space between thoughts getting slightly wider. The connections still work. They just take a moment longer than they should. "Talk to me," Nora said. "About what?" "Anything. Tell me something." He looked up at the edge of the ditch, at the dark sky above it. The snow had slowed. That was real, the density of it falling had dropped in the last half hour, and the wind was shifting direction slightly. He registered both without yet knowing what to make of them. "When I was 12, he said, my dad took me ice fishing. 6 in the morning, we're on this frozen lake, and I've got the line in and I'm convinced I've got a bite. I'm holding this rod so tight my knuckles are white. I'm just locked on it. And my dad looks over and says, "You've been holding that for 40 minutes. There's no fish." Nora exhaled slowly. Something close to a laugh, but quieter. Was he right? There was no fish. He checked the watch. 4:29 a.m. The sky at the edge of his vision above the ditch was still dark, but differently dark. Not the flat black of deep night. Something had changed in the texture of it. He was afraid to name it yet. The shivering had eased. Not because he was warmer, he wasn't sure he was warmer, but because his body had settled into something closer to accommodation. That could mean it was coping. Or it could mean it was done fighting. He flexed the fingers of his right hand inside the glove. All four. Present. The hand warmer between them had cooled to barely warm. It had maybe another hour in it. He pressed his face against the top of Nora's head, tucked into the scarf and her hair, and let the warmth there work on his nose and the bridge of his face. Her hair smelled like the car and cold air and something underneath that was just hers. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. 5:17 a.m. The gray wool glove on his left hand had a small split at the seam where the index finger met the palm. He'd noticed it before. He noticed it again now, in the same way, the information arriving and going nowhere, just sitting there in his head. He tucked that hand deeper under the blanket. The sky was lightening. He was sure of it now, not dramatically, not the sudden warm tones of a sunrise in a photograph. Just a slow and reluctant shift at the edge of the visible horizon. The dark becoming less definitive. The kind of light that doesn't announce itself. Nora saw it at the same moment. He felt her go slightly still beside him. Neither of them said anything about it. There was nothing to say. It was just light. It was just the night ending by itself, without help, the way nights do. 5:51 a.m. They heard the truck before they saw it. Marcus had been watching the road through the gap between the car's rear bumper and the snow wall, not expecting anything, just watching, when the first cold flash of headlights swept the guardrail on the far side. The engine sound was low and even, the kind of diesel engine that moves slow on a bad road. He got up. He didn't think about it. He moved to the lip of the ditch and stood up and waved his arm, and the truck slowed, and he felt the strange unreality of another person existing, of there being, in fact, another person on this road who had arrived without being sent for. Nora's hand found his arm as the truck rolled to a stop. She didn't grip hard. Just held it. The driver was a man in his 60s who ran a county road crew and had started his shift at 4:30 and hadn't been surprised to find a stalled car on this stretch. It happened every other winter or so, he said, same general area, something about the grade and the wind. He didn't ask many questions. He had a thermos of coffee and a cab that smelled like diesel and old heating, and Marcus sat in the passenger seat with both hands wrapped around the plastic cup and felt the warmth work through the ceramic and into his palms and all the way up his arms. He didn't drink it for a full 2 minutes. He just held it. Nora sat behind him, the red scarf loose now around her neck, and she looked out the window at the car growing smaller in the side mirror as the truck pulled forward. Marcus looked down at his father's watch. 5:58. He wound it once. Carefully. The same small turns. He put it back on his wrist. They made it to the county maintenance station before 7 a.m. The car was recovered 2 days later. Both of them walked out of that ditch. But the next night was different. The temperature had dropped 8 more degrees by morning. -38. And they weren't in a car this time. They were in a structure that should have held. Except the door had frozen shut from the outside, and no one knew they were there. That's in -38 degrees Fahrenheit blizzard, the door froze shut. If you want what happened next, it's right here.